landing craft, a lot of wrecked airplanes, and there's a lot of activity going on. There's trucks going back and forth, and so as we're unloading from the ship, we're seeing this all, of course, from the ship, and they unload us onto these LCTs, and we go aboard shore, and we line up for roll call, and the five of us are kind of off by ourselves. We have some surface Navy officers with us, and a lot of ground Marines, and they're all going their own way, and so we got orders to report into, the Marine Aviation Shack there, and we went in there and identified ourselves, and we were assigned to get down here to a tent area, and that we logged in there and got everything, got some chow, and then we were just waiting orders, and I was trying to find out how soon we'd be assigned to go someplace, and the sergeant said, I have no idea, sir, when they're going to call you up for orders. It could be in 5 minutes, or it could be tomorrow morning. So I said, is there anybody around here that was here during, when the thing was hot? And he says, yeah, you'd get a kick out of meeting this guy or that guy. And so he introduced me to a couple of enlisted men, a couple of sergeants, and then we jumped in a Jeep and went out. And he was describing a lot of the area and what the problems were, and what the Japs had done, and how short we were of supplies. And I got a real vivid first-hand shot of what was going on there. And we got back and had dinner, and nothing was happening, and we were sitting around talking with some of the other people and trying to get familiar with this. And of course, you got all those goony birds, or you got all these different animals and insects and things that sound different, in the palm trees, and it's just there was a completely big thing. We're just kind of wide-eyed looking at it. And about that time, this major comes up, comes into our tent, and wants to know who's in charge. And we're looking at each other, and nobody was in charge. We're just five guys, and standing there. So he said, who's got the shortest name? And Jody says, I guess I have. And he says, okay. He says, all right, then we'll make you the leader. And Jody says, well, I'm not really the leader. So he points at me. He said, what's your name? I said, Hawkins. He says, okay, you take over, and we'll wait for Jody to make up his mind later on. So my name is Major Owen, and I'm your new skipper. Jesus Christ, this guy was really something. And he wasn't all that tall. He was only about 5'7", 5'8", but a hell of a nice guy. And this was his second trip out. He'd been out on the first part of Guadalcanal, so I could have saved myself the time and just talked to the skipper. So they had some brand new SPDs, and we jumped in those after a couple hours, and we got them all gassed up and everything all set. And he said, okay, Hawkins, you fly number 2, Doty, you fly number 3, and Norris and Burrell, you take up 4 and 5. Away we go. So we take off from Henderson and fly to up to Munda, which is about not too far up, I don't know, maybe a half an hour, 45-minute flight up to Munda. And we land there, and it's all beach and coral and a real nice strip. And this is where we meet the first phase of our flight, where we are assigned to VMSB 341, and that's what the Major Owen, the skipper, this is his squadron. And so we're the replacements. These guys have been through a hell of a mess. They are in on the last part of Guadalcanal, and they helped secure Munda. And so he said, we're only here at Munda here for a short time. We're going to be taking some familiarization flights so you pilots can get acquainted. And as long as you flew my number 2 spot, Hawkins, he says, we're going off tomorrow. We want all you pilots plus the regular pilots. And so we went down into the briefing room, and he was assigning that this is going to be a familiarization flight. We're going to be carrying just one 500-pounder. We're going out to this particular target, and there will be no problem with air cover. We don't need air cover. The The Japanese air is not too prevalent in this area. We don't expect to have anything. We haven't seen any Jap airplanes around here now for a few weeks, so we call the area secured. And he's up at the board and drawing out everybody's position in the flight, and he wants the older pilots to watch the 5 of us and to see that how we're going to conduct ourselves. So we had, let's see, we had seven V's of 3, so the 21 of us took off, and we all go down the line up there, and skipper's off first, and I'm flying number 2, so I'm off second, and he takes off, and this is a real feeling now you're belonging to it. And here's my first strike, and we're really going out there, and I got my knife strapped to my flight coveralls, I got my 45 strapped on my canteen, and I'm ready to go. I got a little my survival kit there where it's supposed to be, and I'm ready to go. And here we're out fighting Japs. So the skipper had said after takeoff, get your coffee grinder over here and turn it on. And I turned the thing on, and I think the first words were, "Welcome to the Atterbury Cocktail Hour." And the Marines had set up a little radio station and would broadcast over it, and we were using that as our homing device rather than just a dot dash or a dash dot. I think it's ANN. So we, I thought this was kind of neat, flying up here and listening to the Atterbury Cocktail Hour, and they're playing songs and giving all sorts of hot scoop about Tokyo Rose and all these things that are going on. And we're climbing up, and the skipper looks over at me, has me move out a little bit. I was glued right on his airplane. He looked over and kind of gave me a real professional one. Just out a little bit more there. That's right there. And so we're climbing up, and he told us we wouldn't have to worry with oxygen. We just go about 13,000 feet. And so he wiggles his wing, which is your thing for test the guns. So I turn on the gun switches and test the guns, and we don't have any the 5 of us don't have any gunners with us yet. We're alone up in the front cockpit. So he gives us a signal to get us into step up echelon. So we all step up, to the right, and I'm number 2. I come underneath him and come up over on his right side. I've been flying on his left side. That's where the number 2 is. So I come over on his right side and step up about 10, 12 feet. And we're approaching the target area, and I'm looking down there, and I'm looking at my overlay that you carry in your left-hand pocket, and it's dated, and this is the target, and this is where the first section is going to bomb, and this is where the second section is going after, and the 4th section, 5th section, and so forth. So he peels off, and right away, when he peels off, I can't see him because he goes right straight down. So to see them, your procedure is roll yourself. So a second or 2 later, I roll over, and down we go. And Jesus Christ, they got the skipper. I didn't see any flak. God almighty, how could they already shot the skipper down already? And I'm in my dive. I got my overlay looking there, got the gun sight on, the dive brakes open, checking all my manifold pressure and all my gauges, and I'm doing about 290, 300 coming down there. And I got my target in sight, and oh my God, Jesus, this is really something. And boy, how in the hell did they get the skipper? This is all the thoughts going through my mind. Oh, by the way, we did have our gunners. Yes, we did have our gunners. I got red in the back seat. I'll have to go back and tell you a little bit about that. So we're coming down on the dive, and geez, I got the target right on my sight, and I racked off the 500, come out at 400 or 500 feet above the deck, and I do my evasive tactics up to the left and over to the right and back to the left, these big turns so that the yak isn't going to get you. And I said, Donald, calling my gunner. I call him up. I said, have you seen the skipper? Did they get the skipper? Did they shoot him? Did they get him already? And he says, no, sir. The skipper and the rest of the squadron are back there about 4 miles. They're just coming out of their dive, sir. Holy jeez, did I goof this one. Holy cow. So I'm walking the rudder pedals, trying to slow this thing down. I do a circle, and here comes the skipper, and about 500 feet, uh-oh, and he starts a slow turn. Finally catches up to me. And so I join up on him, and all the rest of the guys join up, and he looks over at me like nothing had happened and just said, "That's fine, good position." Well, we climb up to about 10,000 feet and head back to Munda, and so we go into our breakup formation, and he breaks off and I break off after him. About 300 yards between us, we come in and land. We go in for interrogation, and the skipper's going to want to have a report. And of course, when I climb out of the plane, and my gunner, Red, is looking at me. Red Donald, he's looking at me, Jesus, I wonder what kind of a pilot I drew in this thing. And of course, geez, I'm just, I'm all shocked. So the skipper points at me. His Jeep comes up, and the skipper always goes up by himself in the Jeep so he can get there into the interrogation room ahead of everybody else, so he can be with the Air Combat Intelligence Officer for a minute or two before the rest of his pilots come up. And we usually are in some kind of Jeeps or trucks, whatever they got handy. So the skipper says, wrinkles his finger at me, says to come with him. He says, "Lieutenant," he says, I understand exactly what happened up there. This is your first strike, and you were very excited. You followed everything, and he said you're just a wee bit fast, coming down. When I break off like that," he said, "you just wait just a couple more seconds before you come, and you didn't hit your dive brakes, and that's when you passed me up." And so I, on these familiarization flights, Hawk, was just try to ease into it a little bit slower and just take it easy. And yes, sir. And he said, "Now you're going to get ribbed a little bit from this, but I'll set the guys straight right off the bat here, so that." But he said, "You're flying good formation. You hit your target beautifully, but just take it a little bit easy when we start out." And he says, "I'll try to remember that you're right behind me, and I'll hold my dive flaps for another few seconds so that you can line up right behind me instead of ahead of me this time." "Yes, sir." So we got an interrogation. All the guys are, they're rubbing their chest, and saying, "Oh God, we got a hot rod." And so it's getting, it's really getting to be something. And then finally the skipper tells them to shut up, and then that's all right. And so we got down. So I was ribbed about that for 3 days. But the skipper was real nice. He just said, "Come on up and fly number 2 with me." And that was kind of an honor to me to fly on the skipper's wing. So then the next day we went out, and he, we went over to another target, and this is another more or less just a familiarization flight. Now I've settled down a little bit. I realize that this isn't really the front combat zone that we're in yet, and so when he peels off, I peeled off, and I stayed behind him this time, and everything went fine, and and he turned out to be just a great skipper and a heck of a good friend too. We went out on some strikes for shipping. We had some Jap ships up a couple hours away that were trying to, up at the Bismarck Archipelago, which is all part of Guadalcanal and Munda and Bougainville and that. And the Marines had just recently taken Bougainville, and so we're assigned to go up there. Already there's a couple of fighter squadrons on the base there already, and not base, but the strip. And the strip at Bougainville was called Piva. We had Piva strip, and then they kept working on it, so we finally had Piva North and Piva South, and this is where we met. This is where we first met Pappy Boynton and all his gang. And some of his guys were rotating home, and new ones were coming in. And it was from here that we started our first flights up to Simpson Harbor, up to Rabaul. when we were at these islands like this, I should say that we would be about 4 pilots in a tent, and things were pretty well set up as far as a chow hall. We had some places would have a tent. At Bougainville here, the place was all secured, and we didn't have to worry about Japs. And until about 6 nights later, all of a sudden, there's a tremendous barrage, and the Mud Marines identified it as something similar to what our 105s would be. And they couldn't figure out. We thought they cleaned it out, and this is when we first became acquainted with the caves that they built. So we stopped our long hauls going up to Rabaul, which I'll get into a little bit of detail there. So the first priority now was to blow out the remaining Marines that we had, the remaining Jap Marines that we had left on Bougainville. And Bougainville had some real high hills. You might even call them mountains, but they weren't snow-type mountains. They were the kind that had trees and woods all the way up to the top and down. But they're very big hills, very, very sharp, high hills, and several of them. And the island was quite large. And so we started to fly strikes out of there. And by now, the biggest contingent of ground forces was Army, and I think there was a battalion of Marines still left there. We lost about 2,600 Marines taking that rock. One of the cute little inside stories there was the Marines were landing and pushing forward. They had landed on 2 different parts of the island simultaneously, and one group got through faster than the other, which is normally the case. So you hit more resistance in one spot. And so as these Marines were slugging through the jungle there, they were about 100, 150 yards off the beach, and they hear this real loud noise, motor noise, and so they think, uh-oh, they got Jap tanks. And so all these guys are getting their motors out and getting the heaviest equipment they got that you go with. On your landings, you don't have any artillery or anything like that in the first waves. So they got the heaviest motors they've got, and they're looking around, and they got security out and checking up in front, and they're getting closer and closer to this motor noise, and they break out of this jungle a little bit, and they'll be damned. There's a Navy Seabee sitting on a Caterpillar tractor, and he's mowing down these great big coconut trees, and there's another tractor over there about 100 yards from him, and they got about 50, 70 of these Seabees, and these guys are working their ass off trying to make a new airstrip. and the Mud Marines were telling that, but this was the Seabees for you. They were a very aggressive group, and it was one of the things that they assigned you. If you were a truck driver in civilian life, you were a truck driver in the Seabees, and if you ran a Caterpillar tractor in civilian life, you were a Caterpillar tractor driver in the Seabees. And this just sped the work up so much. You'd think that, well, that makes common sense, except that the Army engineers would take a clerk typist and put him in a truck, and et cetera, and they were much slower in getting things done, in my experience, than the Seabees. But anyway, back to that, we kept having strikes up there. This is where we first got into napalm, and that was about a 179-gallon drop tank. We had that full of a compound which we call gel gasoline, and you drop that tank, and the fire would just spurt out for hundreds of yards if you had a clear area, or about 75 yards if you were in the jungle like that. And this was more effective than bombs in some cases. It all depended upon the personnel on the deck and what kind of a problem the enemy was faced with. But there was no escaping. There was no escaping gel gasoline, because when it would hit, it would splash all over the area. And we had developed a pretty good technique on this, and we'd, of course, done a lot of close air support, as I talked about earlier, where we're conscious of the wing. So we were perfecting our little craft here by
supporting the Army up there, but our problems were kind of complicated because the Army was using one kind of a map and we were using...
They were using one kind of a map, and we had a different grid, a different type of map. So we solved that by taking one of our pilots every day and having him go up to the command post and then directing the aviation in. It served a lot of purposes because the officers on the deck didn't really know how to use aviation. They would try to direct you into a mountain or have you come at a different angle where it wouldn't be as well. So it worked out that having an aviation officer up on the line was very, very effective. We all took turns doing this, and this is where you really got to know what you were doing. You got to know the men you were protecting and so forth. One day I was up there assigned to duty on the command post, and I said, now how did you guys like that strike yesterday? And the guy says, Jesus, don't come any closer than that. You blew me right out of my boots. And we were very, very conscious about when we would come in, they would dive into the foxholes, and we were so conscious of not wanting to drop or strafe on our own troops. And this was just paramount in our mind. We'd get just paranoid if we ever thought that we were, hitting our own guys. So we would try to work, 150 feet to 250 feet, away from our own troops. And that's why when you made your approach in there, you had to go slower. Now we were not doing strictly dive bombing on some of this close support. We would come in at low, very low, and going pretty slow, maybe 150 to 175 knots, so that we would not miss the target or miss the reason we were there, was to chauffeur this ordnance over and put it there exactly where they wanted it. The reason I mention this is that the Air Corps would come in wide open on several different landings that they did on Guadalcanal and Munda before. They'd come in so fast and just dropped the bombs, and they were worried about getting their own can out of there, and they were just flying too fast. And the whole reason was that they had not been interdoctrinated or had any specialty work in close air support. It wasn't anything against the Air Corps, they just never had that training. And that was all the training that every Marine pilot gets is concentrated on close air support. So we were very happy to see that we could do the work, and that way we finally found our way into these caves was that the ground Marines would give us a rough estimate within about 30-40 yards of where that hole they thought was the cave entrance, and then we would fly in there and try to throw a 1,000-pounder or a 500-pounder right into that hole if we could, or gel gasoline or napalm. And this one trip was just a little sidelight here. This one trip was real funny. We were all diving on this thing, trying to hit this cave hole, and the skipper missed it, and I came by on the thing, and I didn't get it. And this other fellow came by, and he ran it right smack in there, and he dropped his bomb right into it. And as he dropped his bomb into it, of course, I'm just going over the top of the mountain now, and he has put the bomb in about 3/4 of the way up the mountain, and he's behind me about 4 seconds. And unbeknown to any of us, there was another cave entrance right on top of the mountain. And so when I went over, Burrell's blast into the hole, I think they counted something like 156 holes in my airplane, where all this rocks and crap and junk from there had smacked my airplane as I flew over. And I had a little bit of things missing back on the tail, a few little spots. So we were joking about that. Just one of the little things that goes on. Red was pretty excited about it. He thought that the whole Jap army was shooting at him, and he was bending over the side in his shirt sleeves with his twin 30s pointed down there, strafing the heck out of everybody. And actually what it was caused, all the damage was caused by me flying over the hole in the cave that Burrell had, popped his bomb into. The weather on Bougainville was, it was awful to terrible. I don't know which was worse, when it would rain, and I imagine we've all been in very large rainstorms, but there's nothing to take the place when you say the sky opens up, and it's just like somebody up in the next someone up on a ladder above you dumping buckets of water on you one after another. Never have seen rain like that come down, the intensity of it. So when we get these cells and these squall lines coming through, of course all operations were secured, and then we'd spend a lot of our time in the tent, and we'd probably go down to chow hall and see what's going on. And we'd always have to have, whenever you'd gather a bunch of pilots together, of course, one of the major pieces of construction on any squadron site is you got to set up a bar someplace. And we were always constantly trying to find booze. And anybody that ever had any stateside liquor, of course, this was the top priority. This one day we had, we were secure, there was nothing really going on. We were waiting to get some messages from some copra farmers up the line. There was they were suspecting that some Jap ships were going to be moving in to support something up at Simpson Harbor at Rabaul. So we were more or less waiting around to get this information. And this one day, this Army DC-3, what do they call them, R4D flies in. What do they call them, C-47. So this guy flies in, real hotshot Air Corps guy, and he comes down out of it, and he said, "Hey, how would you guys like to buy some booze?" And I got some good old American booze here. And he had 2 or 3 name brands of some American bourbon, and he had 3 cases of some scotch. And so we said, "God, yeah, you're a real savior. God, what a buddy you are. Great to see you." He says, "Hey, anything to help out the servicemen." And so he said, "How much is it?" He said, $65 a bottle. $65 for a fifth? He says, "Hey, take it or leave it. You know what you want to do." So a couple of the fighter pilots were standing there too from Pappy Boynton's outfit, and there were about 5 or 6 were standing around, and we were. He kind of winks at us, and kind of said, "Go ahead." So I went over to him and said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Go ahead, order all the booze you want." He says, "I got an idea." So I says, "Yeah, okay, I'll take a case." "You want a whole case? God, you guys have got money." And so we found out that he had 12 cases. And between the 5 or 6 of us there, we accounted for all the 12 cases. We were all, digging in our pockets for money and all that. And then this one Corsair pilot says, I can't remember his name now, he says, "I'm on the scramble, with 3 other pilots. And we haven't shot down anything lately. He says, I'm going to tell you this right now, buddy. Why don't you get right back in your little airplane?" He says, we'll get your money for you. Here's your money." He says, "I would imagine you maybe get 200 or 300 feet off the strip before we get you." "What are you talking about?" He says, "Look at here." He says, you goddamn Army guys come in here, are going to try to sell us American booze for $65 a bottle." He says, and so this Corsair pilot's really lacing this guy out. So we said, "Okay, go ahead, take our money." And he says, "I'll bet you all the money you got that you're not going to clear over 300 feet down the end of the strip. You're going to go right out in the bay." Well, now look, guys, I was just kidding, hell, this stuff, I don't need any money for this. This is all this, really, this is, it's good to give it to you. It makes me feel good inside that I can, help you Marines out, because, you guys have a pretty rough life. And so with that, he doesn't want any money. He leaves with 12 cases of booze. He gets in that plane, and 2 Corsair pilots go down there who are on the scramble standby in case we get a jump on the strip. So they go down and rev up the engines, and they're sitting there revving up their engine, and this guy, he was waving out. He's got his hand sticking out up there on that R4D, on that C-47. He's just waving at those guys,